Hi, everyone. It's Margaret Keefer back for some tips for classroom management. I'm the PD specialist here at Millville Public Schools, along with Beth Bemfer. So I've been in education for about 24 years, and classroom management is definitely one of the hardest things that a teacher has to deal with. But today I'm just going to give you a few quick tips and about building culture, accountability, and planning. And if you need more help with classroom management, Beth and I are always willing to come to your classroom here at MPS and help you out with your classroom management. So the first thing I want to talk about is using a classroom management template. For years, I kept thinking that I had it down. My first 4 years of teaching were just about survival, and I thought I had my rules posted and my expectations, but there were things that I didn't even think about. So this classroom management template was developed by PBSIS, and then we modified it. So just if you look at the classroom management template, you'll see that there are morning routines, and they're not routines for you. That's not get my coffee, fight with the copier, say hi to everyone, and scramble to my room. Instead, it's the morning routines of how your students enter the room or how they come in for a block or a period. Have you told them how to enter the room or how to get started on their work? What happens when they arrive late? I've heard so many teachers tell me that students are disruptive when they come back in the room after arriving late. But have you ever established a routine for that? When you take a look at routines for managing work, have you told students how do they get your attention? Do they just cry out, "Hey, miss"? Or is there a way that they should get your attention? Is it more than just raising their hand? Are there appropriate times? By filling in these morning routines and routines for managing work, it not only helps you think through it, but it's very clear with the students. One of the ones on that routines for managing work that a lot of teachers don't realize is transitioning. What happens when you're doing center work or station work or even transitioning from one part of the room to another? A lot of students just mosey on their way to try to get to the next space. Do you have a way that they are supposed to walk from space to space? I had a great conversation with a teacher in an elementary school about walking kids down the hall. And she determined that they were going to walk like certain animals, or around Halloween, she had them walk like a zombie. It was just a fun way to have students transition. And then your ending routines. We're not going to take time to go through the whole classroom management template, but you can get the template and take a while just to sit down and look through it. Do you have routines and procedures for each of these things? And do your students know about them? Do they know how to act in your classroom? We can't take for granted that our students know. So let's start with one of the biggest things about classroom management. Does anybody recognize this guy? Well, if you're over the age of 35, you probably do. If you remember the TV show Cheers, when this man, Norm, walked in the room, everyone said, "Hi, Norm." And the theme song to Cheers was, "I want to go where everyone knows my name." That's what our classrooms are supposed to be like. Not a bar, but a place where everybody knows our name, where everyone cares that we're here. We want it to be a place that when we walk in, everyone says, "Hey," and they recognize us. And that's about building culture in your classroom. Climate and culture. Culture always trumps content. If you don't have the culture in your room, then you won't be able to do the content, and none of these tips are going to work. You can have the best lesson plans, the best bulletin boards, and the best intentions, but until you build those relationships with students, it's not going to happen. This is a huge part of classroom management. And Steve Matus, you can go back and view his video on building classroom culture and rapport. Beth and I also have some strategies for that. One of the ways is to do an avid social contract. We just did one with a teacher at Lakeside, and it's working very well. An avid social contract is where the whole class works on doing the rules and expectations for the contract. And it's a contract. So they need to abide by that. It's a great way to teach students what a contract means, but it's really important to have their input. A lot of teachers might feel uneasy about doing this, especially maybe for a group of second graders, but they'll come up with some great ideas. And if they don't have all the ideas that you want, you can add some. Maybe they forgot in ninth grade to say that they shouldn't have their cell phones out. Well, you're part of the social contract too, so you can add that. But Avid has a great way to do this by using Post-it notes or a gallery walk to create a social contract. And when students are not obeying the contract, you can use that social contract hanging in your room to point them back to the appropriate behaviors. Another good idea for classroom management and thinking about culture is to actually teach the habits of mind. Here are the 16 habits of mind that in our workshops we've been referring to. Persisting, managing impulsivity. You can take a look and see which ones students have the most problems with. Maybe you want to pick one habit of mind a month to focus on in your classroom, even if that's in high school. This all goes in with social emotional learning and self-management, self-awareness, building relationships, and responsible decision-making. We can't assume that our students know how to do these things. It's a big task, but it's all part of building culture in your classroom. Now, once you've built the culture, there are some other things that you could do. So I love this. Classroom management is not about tips and tricks. It's how we relate, speak, encourage, guide, and care. But even though I said it's not about tips and tricks, I'm going to give you some anyway. So once you've established that relationship and you're learning how to speak with your students, encourage, guide, and care them, here are some quick tips to use. So tip number 1, use a call and response to refocus students and reinforce effort. A lot of you may have these. There's the typical 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, 1, 2, eyes on you, or a clap. One of the things I've been using is a bell or a singing bowl. And you can get these on Amazon or through Trainer's Warehouse. And they give students a little bit of time to get back and to focus. And it's a sound that they respond to. So what's your call and response? Is it something like Avid rocks, or is it a clap? But students need to have one of these for you to bring them back. Some teachers use hands go up, mouths go shut. In high school, it might seem a little odd to have a call and response, but you can still have one of these. It might be that when you stand in a certain part of the room, or like I said, using a singing bowl or a chime. Call and response is really great to get students back when you need to refocus them. It's also better than yelling. When we yell, students forget or don't even pay attention because they're so used to that tone of voice. Which brings us to our next thing. I've been doing a lot of research lately on neurolinguistics. That's the study of how the way we speak and the words we use really affect how people feel. So by front loading your expectations in your lessons and the way you reinforce effort, it can be really important. Let me give you a professional development example. So a lot of times I have to tell teachers about state mandates. And I started thinking about it. A lot of times I would walk into a class and say, all right, everybody, we're going to do this PD today. I know no one wants to be here to hear about this state mandate, but we have to do it. So let's just get through it. Well, the way I front loaded that was I already put a negative expectation on what I was about to say. And I have to change that. If I want you to be positive, my expectation of positivity has to be reflected in my voice and in my tone and in the words that I choose. So how do you front load your expectations? Do you call them rules? Do you call them expectations? Do you call them respect? How do you put forth what you want students to do? What are the words that you choose? There's a great book out called School Talk, and it talks a lot about the way that students receive the language that we use. So think about how you front load your expectations. Tip number 3, your expectations and directions need to be clear and consistent. You might say, Margaret, I've been doing this for a very long time. I know that. But really, one of the hardest things to do in a classroom is be consistent. One of the things that you can do with giving directions and making sure that students hear directions is to always give directions from the same place in the classroom. When I started doing this with younger students, I realized that they were much better to pay attention to me. So they knew when I went to a certain part of the classroom and I did a certain hand motion that kind of looked like I was directing a plane in for a landing, that they needed to follow directions. So come up, if you're in an elementary school classroom, come up with a space where you will stand when you give directions and come up with some kind of hand motion. Once you do the hand motion, wait till all students are doing the hand motion with you and then give the directions. You'll get much less, what did you say again? How do we do that again? And make sure that your directions are concise, clear, and they're chunked for easy understanding. Sometimes students don't even understand what our expectations are, and we might think they're concise and clear. You may want to consider doing a gallery walk. For instance, put your expectations around the room and give students different color stickers. Have them rate how much they understand your expectation. Maybe they put a blue sticker on for that, it's very clear, and a red one for expectations they don't understand. You may be surprised, even in a high school or middle school classroom, if that they don't understand the expectations or the expectations are fuzzy. Scholastic.com has a great worksheet on fuzzy, rigid, and clear expectations. Being consistent can be very tiring, but in 24 years of teaching, it's probably the one that I had to work on the most. We all get tired by the end of the day, but if we want our classrooms to be successful, we need to be incredibly consistent with the way we give directions and the way we give our expectations out to our students. They notice inconsistency. Teacher tip number 4, process checks are your friend. So what's a process check? A process check is when students are working individually, or maybe they're working in a group project, and you need to make sure that they are staying on task. So here are some easy process checks that you can use for when they're working in groups. This is a huge part of classroom management. You might want to try a fist of 5, where you just say process check and you see how many students hold up a fist. A fist might mean they're not getting very far, or maybe they're frustrated. A 5 might be we're okay. You can do these process checks at any time to bring students back into line. It's also a great formative assessment. There's an algebra teacher that uses these. He has students close their eyes and asks if they got the concept. And when they raise their hand in a fist or give them a number 1, he knows that he has to go back and do that concept again. Emoji cards are also really fun way to work with elementary students, giving each group an emoji card, whether it's the ones that you see here or different ones that you've made up. And they circle where they are. How is their group feeling? Are they staying on task? Are you frustrated? It's a good way to check for their emotions, their self-regulation, their persistence, and how they're doing in the group. For older students, you can use plus delta cards. At the end of each cooperative learning activity, I always had my students fill out plus delta cards, but you can use it as a process check in the middle. Students will know that these are coming and that they need to stay on track. Tip number 5 might be difficult for some of us. Know when to use your teacher voice. I want to ask you a question. What is your teacher voice? Is your teacher voice just firm and direct? Or is your teacher voice loud, scary, and do you yell? And think about that for a second. There's a great article by Cult of Pedagogy who talks about when we yell, students learn to ignore our regular voice. And it's a hard thing for us to think about. Are there times, yes, when maybe we need to yell? When there's something unsafe that's about to happen, or we need to get a student's attention because they're about to get hurt, or there's a fight, or things like that. But if you continually are using a loud voice, students will ignore that time when you are trying to use your regular voice. So sit back and examine for a minute. When you teach, what tone of voice do you use? That's about building rapport. Do you use a personal tone? Do you use an informal tone? Do you know when to use them? But when do you use your teacher voice? When do students know that they need to sit up and take notice? Tip number 6, know when it's time for a break. There's a great app called Smiling Mind, and it's free. You can put it on your cell phone. And they have 1 minute to 5 minute techniques where you can just get students refocused. Or you can use some brain breaks. A brain break isn't get out your cell phone or chat with a neighbor. These are actually brain breaks where students are doing something. Beth and I have about 50 brain breaks that you can use in your class. But know when it's time to take a break in your class. Know when it's time to stop for just a minute. Sometimes we get so caught up in our content and we realize that students are getting antsy or fidgety, and we just need to stop and take a break. So the Smiling Mind app is a way to do that. Brain breaks are a way to do that, or even asking a silly question to redirect them. Like, if a turtle loses its shell, is it naked or homeless? Maybe you don't want to do that with 3rd graders, but let me tell you, 8th graders love it. And it will refocus them back to the activity that you are doing. The 8th graders we did it with at a big workshop, we had 50 of them in one room. They had a debate. They wound up actually debating whether a turtle was naked or homeless. And finally, one student said, the turtle's just dead. So it can be a great way. So ask a silly question and give your students a break. Tip number 7, debrief, debrief, debrief. We don't have enough time in our lives to reflect, but sometimes when things are not going well in our classroom, we need to take a step back and debrief with our students. Maybe we use a reverse brainstorming exercise like we've done at some of our PD days. Believe it or not, this works great for students. Even 2nd graders can do reverse brainstorming. Maybe you need to institute morning meeting, or in the secondary classroom, have a protocol for when things aren't going well, and students can actually call a 5-minute meeting to discuss what's happening. With older students, ask why 5 times as a debrief works really well. Or maybe you just have to do a classroom reboot, where you sit down with your kids and say, what's going on in here? What do we need to change? And now what action are we going to do to change that and be effective in our classroom so everyone can be successful and learn? Don't be afraid to ask for help. Part of debriefing is working in your PLC, working with a colleague, calling Beth or I, your supervisor, or one of our administrators, just to talk about how to do better in your classroom. So sit back, debrief with your kids, talk about how things are going, and don't be afraid to do that. As teachers, we like to kind of control our classrooms, but we need to trust our students. Sometimes they have things that we don't even know are going on, and it's a great way to get their feedback and give them some ownness in the classroom. Last but not least, tip number 8. I probably should have started with this, but your best classroom management strategy is a well-planned, engaging lesson. I'm one of those people that I always had too much planned, but you know, if your lesson is well-planned and engaging, you have less classroom management issues. So try cooperative learning activities. Think of ways to bring video and technology into your room. Think about being reflective. Use inquiry-based assignments, project-based learning. A well-planned, engaging lesson is key. And remember the 10-2 rule. The 10-2 rule is if you've been talking for 10 minutes, you need 2 minutes of time for your students to reflect, be quiet, think, pair, share, or do something to digest that information. You've been listening to me for about 22 minutes, and you've probably been a little distracted. So think about that 10-2 rule with your students. Even if you have a well-planned, engaging lesson, they need some time to reflect. I hope these tips help you out, and maybe you can try one. Last but not least, if you do try one of these tips and it doesn't work the first time, remember, you need to try them for about 10 days. It takes 21 days to form a habit. It takes 7 years to break one. So thank you for listening, and I hope you use one of these tips about classroom management.